When Ms. Eleanor settled onto her usual park bench, she thought it would be just another quiet afternoon feeding the birds. But then she noticed a young girl, Lily, nervously walking towards her, glancing over her shoulder as if she was being followed. In that moment, as their eyes met, Ms. Eleanor saw the fear and desperation in Lily's face, a look that demanded immediate action. Just then, Ms. Eleanor spotted a stranger watching them closely, his intentions unclear but unmistakably dangerous. She knew she had to protect this child at all costs. Before we get into this gripping story, let us know in the comments where you're watching from. And if you find yourself drawn into this emotional journey, don't forget to subscribe. The sun peeked through the wispy clouds, casting a warm glow over Oakwood Park. As the morning dew evaporated from the grass, a familiar figure made her way along the winding path. Ms. Eleanor, a petite woman in her early 70s, walked with a slight shuffle, her silver hair neatly pinned back. She wore a comfortable cardigan and carried a well-worn canvas bag, its contents rustling with each step. Approaching her favorite bench, Miss Eleanor's eyes crinkled with a smile. The wooden seat, weathered by countless seasons, sat beneath a sprawling oak tree. She lowered herself onto it with a contented sigh, feeling the familiar grooves beneath her fingertips. "Good morning, my little friends," she cooed, reaching into her bag. A flock of pigeons, as if on cue, began to gather at her feet. Ms. Eleanor pulled out a small paper bag filled with birdseed and carefully opened it. The scent of the seeds wafted through the air, drawing even more birds to her side. With a gentle flick of her wrist, she scattered a handful of seeds onto the ground. The pigeons cooed and pecked, their feathers shimmering in the morning light. Ms. Eleanor watched them with a warm, nostalgic smile that hinted at memories from long ago. "There you go," she murmured, tossing another handful. "Plenty for everyone." As she fed the birds, Ms. Eleanor's mind wandered to a time when her life was filled with noise and laughter. She could almost hear the echoes of her children's voices, the pitter-patter of little feet running through her house. But those days were long gone now. Her children had grown up and moved away, starting families of their own in distant cities. What was once a bustling household full of love and activity had slowly faded into quiet solitude. The park had become her refuge, a place where she could feel connected to the world around her, even if only for a little while each day. Ms. Eleanor's gaze drifted to a group of children playing on the nearby playground. Their shrieks of joy and peals of laughter carried across the park, bringing a faint smile to her face. A little girl with pigtails zoomed down the slide, her arms raised in triumph as she landed. A boy chased his friend around the monkey bars, their faces flushed with excitement. "Oh, to be young again," Miss Eleanor chuckled to herself, tossing more seeds to the pigeons. She found solace in watching the children play, their innocence and joy a balm for her lonely heart. It reminded her of the days when her own children were small, when the world seemed full of endless possibilities. As she observed the playground, Miss Eleanor's thoughts drifted to her family. She wondered what her grandchildren might be doing at that very moment. Would they be playing in a park like this one? Would they be laughing and running just like these children? "I bet little Tommy would love that slide," she mused, picturing her youngest grandson. "And Sarah would be all over those monkey bars." A twinge of sadness tugged at her heart. Ms. Eleanor had only met her grandchildren a handful of times, during rare family gatherings or holiday visits. The distance made it difficult to form the close bonds she had always dreamed of having with them. She reached in her bag and pulled out a small photo album. Flipping through the pages, she traced her finger over the smiling faces of her family. There was her daughter's wedding day, her son's college graduation, and a few precious snapshots of her grandchildren as babies. "Look how they've grown," she whispered to herself, a mixture of pride and longing in her voice. She imagined what it would be like to have them nearby, to be able to bake cookies together or read them bedtime stories. Her gentle demeanor hid a deep sense of longing for that connection. Ms. Eleanor closed the album and tucked it back into her bag. She took a deep breath, inhaling the crisp morning air. The park had always been her sanctuary, a place where she could find peace amid her solitude. But today, the ache of loneliness felt particularly sharp. As the morning wore on, Ms. Eleanor continued to feed the pigeons and watch the world go by. She nodded politely to the joggers and dog walkers who passed her bench, exchanging brief pleasantries. A young mother pushing a stroller smiled at her, and Ms. Eleanor felt a pang of envy mixed with joy. "What a beautiful baby," she called out as they passed. The mother beamed with pride, pausing to let Ms. Eleanor admire the sleeping infant. For a moment, she could almost imagine it was her own grandchild. The sun climbed higher in the sky, and the bustling morning crowd began to thin. Families packed up their picnic baskets, and the playground slowly emptied. Ms. Eleanor watched as the park transformed around her, the lively atmosphere giving way to a quieter, more subdued energy. She glanced at her watch, surprised to see how much time had passed. My, where did the morning go?" she murmured to herself. The bag of birdseed was nearly empty now, and most of the pigeons had wandered off in search of new adventures. She glanced around, taking in the now deserted landscape. The colorful playground equipment stood abandoned, swings swaying gently in the breeze as if mourning the absence of eager children. Even the usual crowd of evening joggers and dog walkers seemed to have vanished, leaving Ms. Eleanor feeling oddly exposed. "My goodness," she murmured to herself, "I've never seen the park this empty before." The silence was broken only by the occasional rustle of leaves and distant city sounds. Ms. Eleanor found herself straining to hear any sign of life, the unusual quiet making her more aware of her surroundings than ever before. It was then that she spotted her, a small figure entering the park from the eastern gate. At first, Ms. Eleanor thought it might be a lost child looking for their parents. But as the girl drew closer, it became clear that something was amiss. The child, who couldn't have been more than 8 years old, walked with a nervous energy that seemed out of place in the tranquil setting. Her clothes were slightly disheveled, as if she'd been running or hiding. Her face, framed by messy brown pigtails, was etched with anxiety, her eyes darting back and forth as she made her way deeper into the park. Ms. Eleanor leaned forward on her bench, her brow furrowed with concern. "Hello there, dear," she called out gently, not wanting to startle the child. "Are you all right?" The girl's head snapped up at the sound of Ms. Eleanor's voice, her eyes wide with a mixture of fear and hope. For a moment, she seemed to consider approaching the kindly older woman, but then something made her hesitate. Ms. Eleanor watched as the girl glanced nervously over her shoulder, her small body tensing as if ready to bolt at any moment. It was clear she was looking for something or someone behind her, and the thought sent a chill through Ms. Eleanor's heart. "It's okay," Ms. Eleanor said softly, trying to sound reassuring. "You're safe here. Can you tell me what's wrong?" But the girl didn't respond. Instead, she continued to scan the area behind her, her eyes growing wider with each passing second. The urgency in her movements was palpable, adding to the growing sense of unease that had settled over the park. Ms. Eleanor was about to stand up and approach the child when something caught her eye. At the edge of the park, partially obscured by a cluster of trees, stood a man. He was tall and lean, dressed in dark clothing that seemed to blend into the shadows. But it wasn't his appearance that made Ms. Eleanor's breath catch in her throat. It was the intensity of his gaze, fixed unwaveringly on the young girl. The man's posture was rigid, his body coiled like a spring ready to unwind. There was something undeniably off about him, something that made Ms. Eleanor's instincts scream danger. She had lived long enough to trust her gut feelings, and right now, every fiber of her being was telling her that this man meant harm. As Ms. Eleanor watched, the stranger's hand moved to his jacket pocket, fingers brushing against something concealed within. With growing horror, she realized she could make out the faint outline of what appeared to be a knife. The realization sent a jolt of fear through her, making her heart race. The girl, seemingly unaware of Ms. Eleanor's discovery, continued to move deeper into the park. Her path was erratic, as if she was trying to lose someone who might be following her. With each step, she drew closer to Ms. Eleanor's bench, and the older woman could now see the tears glistening in the child's eyes. Ms. Eleanor's mind raced, trying to decide what to do. Should she call out to the girl again? Try to warn her about the man? Or would that only serve to alert the stranger and potentially escalate the situation? The weight of the decision pressed down on her, knowing that the wrong choice could have dire consequences. Before she could come to a decision, the girl suddenly locked eyes with her. In that moment, something passed between them, a silent understanding, a desperate plea for help. Without warning, the child changed course, making a beeline for Ms. Eleanor's bench. As she approached, Ms. Eleanor could see the fear etched into every line of the girl's face. Her breath came in short, panicked gasps, and her hands trembled at her sides. When she finally reached the bench, she leaned in close, her voice barely above a whisper. "Please," she breathed, her words tinged with desperation. "Please pretend that you know me." The urgency in the girl's voice sent a surge of protective instinct through Ms. Eleanor. Without missing a beat, she opened her arms wide, her face breaking into a warm, welcoming smile. "Oh, sweetheart," she exclaimed, loud enough for anyone nearby to hear. "It's so good to see you. Come here and give your grandma a big hug." As she pulled the girl into a tight embrace, Ms. Eleanor's eyes darted to the edge of the park where she had last seen the stranger. He was still there, his intense gaze now fixed on their interaction. Ms. Eleanor felt a chill run down her spine, but she forced herself to maintain her cheerful facade. "I've missed you so much," she continued, her voice full of manufactured joy. "How are your parents? And school? You must tell me everything." As she spoke, Ms. Eleanor's mind was racing. On the outside, she appeared calm and collected, every inch the doting grandmother. But internally, she was frantically strategizing, trying to figure out the best way to keep this child safe. She discreetly scanned the area, looking for possible exits or potential witnesses. The park, which had seemed so peaceful just moments ago, now felt like a trap. The few remaining people were too far away to call for help without alerting the suspicious man. The main gate was a good distance away, and she wasn't sure if her old legs could outrun a potential pursuer. All the while, she kept up a stream of cheerful chatter, asking the girl about imaginary friends and family members, creating an illusion of familiarity. "And how is your little brother Tommy? Still causing trouble? I bet." The girl, catching on quickly, nodded and mumbled responses, playing along with the charade. But as they hugged, she leaned in close to Ms. Eleanor's ear, her voice shaking as she whispered, "He has a knife. He's been following me. I didn't know where else to go." The words sent ice through Ms. Eleanor's veins. Her suspicions confirmed, she tightened her grip on the girl ever so slightly, her protective instincts kicking into overdrive. In that moment, she made a silent vow to do whatever it took to keep this child safe. "It's all right, dear," she murmured, her voice low and soothing. "I'm here now. You're safe with me. Why don't we sit down?" she said brightly, guiding the girl to the bench. "You can tell me all about your day at school." As they sat, Ms. Eleanor positioned herself between the girl and the direction of the stranger. She kept her movements casual, as if she was simply getting comfortable, but her eyes never stopped scanning their surroundings. "Now then," she said in a whisper, "why don't you start by telling me your name, sweetheart? My old memory isn't what it used to be." The girl, still trembling slightly, managed a small smile. "I'm Lily," she said softly. "Lily," Ms. Eleanor repeated, as if savoring the name. "What a beautiful name for a beautiful girl. And how old are you now, Lily?" Ms. Eleanor asked, trying to buy time. "8," Lily replied, her voice gaining a bit more strength. "8? My, how you've grown," Ms. Eleanor exclaimed, her tone convincingly surprised. She leaned in, as if sharing a secret. "You know, when I was 8, I had the most wonderful adventure in a park just like this one. Would you like to hear about it?" Lily nodded eagerly, seeming to relax slightly in the face of Ms. Eleanor's calm demeanor. As the late afternoon sun cast long shadows across Oakwood Park, Ms. Eleanor continued her impromptu performance, her voice steady and warm as she chatted with Lily. To any casual observer, they might have appeared to be a grandmother and granddaughter catching up after a long separation. But beneath Ms. Eleanor's calm exterior, her senses were on high alert, her eyes constantly scanning their surroundings. "And how is your mother, dear?" Ms. Eleanor asked, her tone light and conversational. "Still making those delicious apple pies, I hope." Lily, catching on quickly, nodded and managed a small smile. Yes, Grandma. She made one just last week. As Lily spoke, Miss Eleanor's gaze flicked briefly to the stranger. He had moved closer, his eyes narrowed as he observed their interaction. It was clear he wasn't entirely convinced by their act, his posture shifting to one of barely restrained aggression. Miss Eleanor felt a chill run down her spine, but she forced herself to maintain her cheerful demeanor. "Oh, how wonderful!" she exclaimed, patting Lily's hand. "You must tell her to save me a slice next time. You know how I adore her baking." The stranger took another step closer, his movements slow and deliberate. Miss Eleanor noticed his hand creeping towards his pocket again, and her heart rate quickened. She knew she had to act fast to prevent the situation from escalating into a potentially violent confrontation. With her free hand, Miss Eleanor reached into her bag, making it seem as though she was searching for something. In reality, she was feeling for her phone, her fingers working deftly to unlock it without looking. "Oh, silly me," she said with a light chuckle. "I forgot to call your mother about our dinner plans. Would you mind if I did that quickly, Lily dear?" Lily shook her head, her eyes wide with understanding. "No, go ahead, Grandma." Miss Eleanor smiled and pulled out her phone, making a show of dialing a number. In truth, she was calling 911, her fingers moving swiftly over the familiar emergency number. As the call connected, she began speaking in a casual tone, her words carefully chosen to alert the operator to their predicament without arousing the stranger's suspicion. "Hello, darling," she said brightly into the phone. "Yes, I'm here with Lily at Oakwood Park. We're having such a lovely time catching up, but I'm afraid we might be a bit late for dinner." She paused, listening to the operator's response. "Oh, you know how it is? Time flies when you're enjoying yourself. But we're not alone here. There's a gentleman who seems very interested in our conversation. Quite persistent, really." Miss Eleanor's eyes met Lily's, and she gave the girl a reassuring smile. "Don't worry, dear," she said ostensibly to the person on the phone, but really meant for Lily. "Everything will be all right. We're just fine here. Aren't we, Lily?" Lily nodded, trying to keep her voice steady as she replied, "Yes, Grandma. We're fine." As Miss Eleanor continued her coded conversation with the 911 operator, the stranger inched closer. His eyes darted between Miss Eleanor and Lily, clearly trying to gauge the authenticity of their relationship. Miss Eleanor could see the doubt in his expression, the tension in his posture hinting that he was ready to act at any moment. Ending the call, Miss Eleanor turned her full attention back to Lily, placing herself protectively in front of the girl. Despite the fear coursing through her veins, she forced her body language to radiate calm authority. She knew that showing any sign of weakness or fear could provoke the man into action. "Well, that's all sorted," she said cheerfully. "Your mother says hello, by the way. Now, where were we?" Before Lily could respond, a deep voice cut through the air. "Excuse me," the stranger said, his tone deceptively polite. "I couldn't help but overhear your conversation. You two seem very close." Miss Eleanor turned to face the man, her expression a carefully crafted mask of friendly curiosity. "Oh, hello there," she said, her voice warm but her eyes wary. "Yes, my granddaughter and I were just catching up. It's been far too long since we've had a proper visit." The stranger's eyes narrowed further. "How nice," he said, a hint of skepticism in his voice. "How long have you two known each other?" Miss Eleanor laughed, the sound only slightly strained. "Oh, my dear man, since the day she was born. 8 wonderful years, isn't that right, Lily?" Lily nodded, but Miss Eleanor could feel her trembling slightly. The man's eyes flicked to Lily, sensing the fear that betrayed their act. A small smile played at the corners of his mouth, and Miss Eleanor felt her heart sink. He was seeing through their charade. Undeterred, Miss Eleanor pressed on, engaging the stranger in a verbal chess game. She knew she needed to buy more time, to keep him talking until help arrived. Her calm exterior belied the urgency she felt as each second ticked by. "You know," she said, her tone conversational, "Lily here reminds me so much of her mother at this age. Same bright eyes, same curious nature. Do you have children of your own, Mr. Smith?" the man supplied after a brief hesitation. "John Smith. And no, I don't have children." Miss Eleanor nodded sympathetically. "Oh, well, They're a blessing and a challenge. Let me tell you. Why? I remember when Lily's mother was about her age. As Ms. Eleanor launched into a fabricated story about Lily's mother, she kept a close eye on Mr. Smith. He seemed unsure how to proceed, caught between his suspicion and the social awkwardness of interrupting an elderly woman's reminiscences. Lily, picking up on Ms. Eleanor's strategy, chimed in occasionally with a well-timed, "Really, Grandma?" or "I didn't know that," adding authenticity to their performance. But as the minutes dragged on, Ms. Eleanor could see the stranger growing increasingly agitated. His hand kept straying to his pocket, and his eyes darted around the park, as if looking for an opportunity or an escape route. "You know," he interrupted suddenly, his voice tight with barely suppressed anger, "I find it hard to believe you two are really related. In fact, I think you're lying to me." Ms. Eleanor felt Lily stiffen beside her, but she kept her own expression calm and slightly confused. "I beg your pardon?" she said, injecting a note of indignation into her voice. "Why on earth would you say such a thing?" The man took a menacing step forward. "Because," he hissed, "I've been watching that girl for days, and I've never seen you before. So why don't you tell me what's really going on here?" Ms. Eleanor's mind raced, searching for a plausible explanation. She opened her mouth to speak, but before she could, Lily's small voice piped up. "Grandma only visits once a year," she said, her voice shaky but determined. "She lives far away in Florida. Right, Grandma?" Ms. Eleanor nodded, silently praising Lily's quick thinking. "That's right, dear. I'm sorry, Mr. Smith, but I don't see how our family arrangements are any of your business." The stranger's face contorted with rage. "Enough," he shouted, causing both Ms. Eleanor and Lily to flinch. "I know you're lying, and I've had enough of this game." He reached into his pocket, and Ms. Eleanor's blood ran cold as she caught a glimpse of metal. Without hesitation, she pushed Lily behind her, shielding the girl with her body. "Now, let's all calm down," Ms. Eleanor said, her voice steady despite her racing heart. "There's no need for violence here. Why don't you tell us what this is really about?" The man's hand trembled, the knife now clearly visible. I just wanted," he stuttered, seeming to struggle with his words. Ms. Eleanor seized on his moment of hesitation. "Whatever it is you want," she said gently, "this isn't the way to get it. Think about what you're doing. Is it really worth ruining your life over?" For a moment, doubt flickered across the stranger's face. But then his expression hardened again. "You don't understand," he growled. "I need that girl. She's the key to everything." Ms. Eleanor felt Lily whimper behind her, and she reached back to squeeze the girl's hand reassuringly. "I'm afraid I can't let that happen," she said, her voice firm. "Lily is under my protection now, and I won't let you harm her." The man's eyes darted between Ms. Eleanor and Lily, his grip on the knife tightening. "You're just an old woman," he sneered. "What can you do to stop me?" Despite her fear, Ms. Eleanor drew herself up to her full height. She might be old, but she was far from helpless. "I may be old," she said, her voice ringing with authority, "but I've lived long enough to know right from wrong. And what you're doing is wrong, Mr. Smith. Very wrong indeed." As she spoke, Ms. Eleanor became aware of a distant sound, the wail of police sirens. Relief flooded through her, but she kept her expression neutral, not wanting to alert the stranger to the approaching help. The man, however, seemed to sense that something had changed. His eyes darted around nervously, and he took a step back. "You've called the police, haven't you?" he accused, his voice rising in panic. Ms. Eleanor shook her head calmly. "I haven't called anyone," she said, which was technically true. She had only dialed 911 and spoken in code. "But think about it, Mr. Smith. How long do you think you can keep this up before someone notices? This is a public park, after all." The tension in Oakwood Park had reached its breaking point. Ms. Eleanor stood firmly between Lily and the increasingly agitated stranger, her heart pounding but her resolve unwavering. Just as it seemed the situation might erupt into violence, two police cars, their lights flashing brilliantly against the dimming sky, pulled up to the park entrance. The car doors swung open, and 4 officers stepped out, their movements cautious but purposeful. They scanned the area quickly, their trained eyes immediately locking onto the scene unfolding near Ms. Eleanor's bench. Police! Don't move! One officer shouted, his hand resting on his holstered weapon. The sudden arrival of law enforcement seemed to shatter the bubble of tension that had enveloped the park. The stranger's face contorted in a mixture of frustration and panic as he realized his carefully laid plans were crumbling before his eyes. He took a stumbling step backward, his gaze darting between the approaching officers and his intended victims. Ms. Eleanor could see the internal struggle playing out on the man's face. His eyes, wide with fear, flicked from side to side as if searching for an escape route. She tightened her grip on Lily's hand, ready to react if the stranger made any sudden moves. For a moment, time seemed to stand still. The police officers advanced slowly, their voices a steady stream of commands and reassurances. Ms. Eleanor held her breath, silently willing the man to surrender peacefully. But then, without warning, the stranger's body tensed. In a burst of desperate energy, he turned and bolted, sprinting towards the far end of the park. "He's running," an officer shouted, immediately giving chase. Ms. Eleanor's instincts kicked in. She spun around, pulling Lily behind her and shielding the girl with her body. "Stay behind me, dear," she said, her voice steady despite the adrenaline coursing through her veins. The park erupted into chaos. Two officers raced after the fleeing suspect, their footfalls heavy on the grass. The other two approached Ms. Eleanor and Lily, their faces a mixture of concern and determination. "Are you all right, ma'am?" one officer asked, his eyes scanning them for any signs of injury. Ms. Eleanor nodded, her arms still protectively around Lily. "We're unharmed, officer. But please catch that man. He threatened us with a knife." The officer's expression hardened at this information. He spoke rapidly into his radio, relaying the details to his pursuing colleagues. "Don't worry," he assured them. "We'll get him." Across the park, the chase was in full swing. The suspect, driven by desperation, vaulted over a low fence and cut through a flower bed. But the police were right on his heels, their training and determination evident in every move. They split up, one officer circling wide to cut off the man's escape route, while the other stayed in direct pursuit. Ms. Eleanor and Lily watched the scene unfold, their hearts racing. The remaining officers stood guard nearby, ensuring their safety while coordinating with their colleagues via radio. "Look," Lily whispered, pointing with a trembling finger. The suspect had reached the park's perimeter, but found his path blocked by the officer who had circled around. He skidded to a halt, spinning wildly as he realized he was trapped. For a brief moment, it seemed he might try to fight his way out. But as the officers closed in from all sides, the fight visibly drained out of him. His shoulders slumped in defeat. "On the ground! Now!" an officer commanded, his voice echoing across the park. The suspect slowly sank to his knees, then lay face down on the grass. The officers converged on him, one quickly securing his hands behind his back with handcuffs while another began to search him. "I've got a knife," the searching officer announced, carefully removing a concealed blade from the man's jacket. "Looks like the old lady was right." A collective sigh of relief seemed to sweep through the park. Ms. Eleanor felt her knees go weak, the full weight of what they'd just experienced finally hitting her. But she remained standing, knowing Lily needed her strength now more than ever. As two officers led the handcuffed suspect back towards the police cars, the others approached Ms. Eleanor and Lily. Their faces were grim but respectful. "Ma'am," one officer said, his voice low and serious, "we need to inform you that this man is a known criminal. He's been linked to several kidnapping cases in the area." The word sent a chill through Ms. Eleanor. She looked down at Lily, suddenly realizing how close they had come to an unthinkable tragedy. Lily, for her part, seemed frozen in place. Her small hand gripped Ms. Eleanor's with surprising strength, and her eyes were fixed firmly on the ground. She seemed unable, or unwilling, to look at the man who had nearly taken her. "It's over now, Lily," Ms. Eleanor said softly, giving the girl's hand a gentle squeeze. "You're safe." But her words seemed to break something inside Lily. The brave facade the girl had maintained throughout their ordeal suddenly crumbled. With a heart-wrenching sob, Lily collapsed against Ms. Eleanor, her small body shaking with the force of her cries. "I was so scared," Lily wailed, her words barely discernible through her tears. "I thought he was going to take me away." Ms. Eleanor's heart broke for the terrified child. She knelt down, ignoring the protest of her aging knees, and gathered Lily into her arms. "Oh, my brave girl," she murmured, gently stroking Lily's hair. "It's all right to be scared, but you were so brave, so very brave. And now it's all over. You're safe now, I promise." She continued to whisper soothing words, rocking Lily gently as the girl's sobs echoed through the park. The police officers stood back respectfully, allowing them this moment of comfort and release. As Lily's cries began to subside, replaced by hiccuping breaths and sniffles, one of the officers approached. He knelt down to their level, his face kind. "You know," he said softly, addressing both Ms. Eleanor and Lily, "what you two did today was incredibly brave. Ma'am, your quick thinking and calm under pressure likely saved this young girl's life. And you, young lady," he added, smiling at Lily, "you were very smart to ask for help when you needed it. You both should be very proud." Ms. Eleanor felt a surge of emotion at the officer's words. Pride, relief, and lingering fear all swirled together in her chest. "Thank you, officer," she managed to say, her voice thick with unshed tears. "We just did what we had to do." The officer shook his head, his admiration clear. "Not everyone would have acted as you did, ma'am. Without your quick actions, this situation could have ended very differently. You're a hero." Ms. Eleanor blushed at the praise, and used to such recognition. "I'm just glad I was here to help," she said quietly. As the officer stood to rejoin his colleagues, Ms. Eleanor turned her attention back to Lily. The girl's sobs had quieted, but she still clung tightly to Ms. Eleanor, as if afraid to let go. "Lily, sweetheart," Ms. Eleanor said gently, "can you look at me for a moment?" Slowly, Lily raised her head. Her face was streaked with tears, her eyes red and puffy from crying. But there was a glimmer of something else in those eyes now, a spark of resilience that made Ms. Eleanor's heart swell with pride. "I want you to know how incredibly brave you were today," Ms. Eleanor said, her voice firm but kind. "You faced a very scary situation, but you didn't give up. You asked for help when you needed it, and you stayed strong even when things got difficult. That takes real courage." Lily sniffled, wiping her nose with the back of her hand. "But I was so scared," she whispered. Ms. Eleanor nodded. "Being brave doesn't mean you're not scared," she explained. "Being brave means doing what needs to be done even when you are scared. And that's exactly what you did today." A small smile tugged at the corners of Lily's mouth. "Really?" she asked, her voice small but hopeful. "Really," Ms. Eleanor confirmed, giving Lily a warm smile. "You're one of the bravest people I've ever met, Lily. Don't you ever forget that." As they sat together on the park bench, the chaos of the arrest continuing around them, Ms. Eleanor felt a profound sense of change settling over her. The park that had been her quiet refuge for so long had become the stage for this intense drama. And she, who had felt so disconnected from the world, had suddenly found herself right at the center of it all. She looked down at Lily, who had nestled against her side, exhausted but finally calm. In this child, Ms. Eleanor saw not just the girl she had saved, but a symbol of all the connections she had been missing in her life. She had acted today not just as a concerned citizen, but as a protector, a comforter, a surrogate grandmother. As the police continued their work, taking statements and securing evidence, Ms. Eleanor's mind wandered to what would come next. There would be questions to answer, reports to file, perhaps even court appearances to make. The quiet routine of her days in the park had been irrevocably disrupted. But as she felt Lily's steady breathing against her side, Ms. Eleanor realized she didn't mind this disruption. In fact, she welcomed it. For the first time in years, she felt truly alive, truly connected to the world around her. As the golden hues of sunset faded into the soft purples of twilight, Oakwood Park buzzed with activity. Police officers moved purposefully about, securing evidence and taking statements, their voices a low murmur against the backdrop of distant sirens and rustling leaves. Ms. Eleanor gazed down at the sleeping child nestled against her side, marveling at the strength and resilience hidden within such a small frame. Lily's face, relaxed in slumber, bore no trace of the fear and anguish that had marred it just hours before. As she smoothed a stray lock of hair from Lily's forehead, Miss Eleanor felt a surge of protective affection wash over her. "Ma'am?" A gentle voice broke through her reverie. Miss Eleanor looked up to see a kind-faced police officer standing before her, notepad in hand. "I'm Officer Sarah Thompson. If you're ready, we'd like to take your statement now." Miss Eleanor nodded, carefully shifting to face the officer without disturbing Lily. "Of course, Officer Thompson. Where would you like me to begin?" As Miss Eleanor recounted the events of the day, her voice low and steady, she found herself marveling at her own actions. The woman who had faced down a dangerous criminal seemed almost a stranger to her now, a braver, more decisive version of herself that she hadn't known existed. Yet as she spoke, she felt that strength settling into her bones, becoming a part of her. Officer Thompson listened intently, her pen scratching across the notepad as she captured every detail. When Miss Eleanor finished, the officer looked up, her eyes shining with admiration. "Miss Eleanor, what you did today was truly remarkable. Your quick thinking and bravery likely saved Lily's life." As the officer moved away to confer with her colleagues, Miss Eleanor felt Lily stirring beside her. The girl's eyes fluttered open, confusion clouding her features for a moment before recognition dawned. "Miss Eleanor?" Lily's voice was small and uncertain. "I'm right here, dear," Miss Eleanor assured her, giving her hand a gentle squeeze. "How are you feeling?" Lily sat up slowly, her eyes darting around the park, as if to confirm that the danger had truly passed. I think I'm okay," she said hesitantly. Then, in a rush of words, "Is he really gone? Did they catch him?" Miss Eleanor nodded solemnly. "Yes, sweetheart. The police caught him. He can't hurt you now." Lily's shoulders sagged with relief, and for a moment, Miss Eleanor thought she might start crying again. But instead, the girl took a deep breath, seeming to gather her courage. "Miss Eleanor," she began, her voice barely above a whisper, "there's something I need to tell you." Miss Eleanor leaned in, her expression open and encouraging. "What is it, dear? You can tell me anything." Lily twisted her hands in her lap, her eyes fixed on the ground. "That man, he's been following me for days," she confessed, her voice trembling. "He kept trying to talk to me, telling me he was my uncle and that my parents had sent him to pick me up." Miss Eleanor felt her blood run cold at Lily's words. The thought of this innocent child being stalked, living in fear for days, made her heart ache. "Oh, Lily," she breathed, "why didn't you tell anyone?" Lily's lower lip quivered, but she pressed on. I wanted to tell my parents," she said, her voice thick with unshed tears. "But I was afraid they wouldn't believe me. They've been so busy lately, always telling me not to bother them with silly things. I thought they'd just say I was imagining things." The girl's words hit Miss Eleanor like a physical blow. She thought of all the times she had seen children in the park, absorbed in their own worlds while their parents stared at phones or talked amongst themselves. How many other Lilies were out there, carrying burdens too heavy for their young shoulders, afraid to speak up? "Lily, look at me," Miss Eleanor said gently, waiting until the girl's tearful eyes met hers. "What you did today was incredibly brave. You trusted your instincts, and you found the courage to ask for help when you needed it most. That takes tremendous strength." Lily sniffled, wiping her nose with the back of her hand. "Really? Really," Miss Eleanor confirmed, her voice firm. "And I want you to know that you can always speak up when something doesn't feel right. Even if the adults in your life seem busy or distracted, it's their job to listen and protect you. You did nothing wrong, Lily. The fault lies entirely with that man, and with the adults who should have been paying closer attention." As she spoke, Miss Eleanor felt a fierce, protective love welling up inside her. This child, who had been so alone and afraid, had trusted her in a moment of desperation. The weight of that trust settled on Miss Eleanor's shoulders, not as a burden, but as a mantle of responsibility she was honored to bear. Lily's eyes, still shimmering with tears, held a glimmer of hope now. "You really mean that?" she asked softly. With all my heart, Miss Eleanor assured her. She opened her arms and Lily fell into them, burying her face in Miss Eleanor's cardigan. As she held the trembling child, Miss Eleanor silently vowed to be the kind of adult that Lily and all children deserved. One who listened, who believed, who protected. Their moment of connection was interrupted by a commotion at the edge of the park. Miss Eleanor looked up to see a couple running towards them, their faces etched with worry and relief in equal measure. "Lily!" the woman cried out, her voice breaking. "Oh, Lily!" Lily's head snapped up at the sound, her eyes widening. "Mom? Dad?" In a flurry of movement, Lily was swept up into her parents' arms. They clung to her desperately, as if afraid she might disappear if they loosened their grip. Tears flowed freely as words of love and relief tumbled from their lips. Ms. Eleanor watched the reunion with a bittersweet smile. She was overjoyed to see Lily safe in her parents' arms, but a small part of her mourned the loss of the connection they had forged. She began to gather her things, preparing to slip away quietly and leave the family to their reunion. But as she stood, Lily's voice rang out. "Mom, Dad, wait. This is Ms. Eleanor. She saved me." The parents turned, seeming to notice Ms. Eleanor for the first time. In their eyes, she saw a maelstrom of emotions, gratitude, shame, and a dawning horror as they began to understand how close they had come to losing their daughter. Lily's mother stepped forward, her hand outstretched. "Ms. Eleanor," she said, her voice choked with emotion, "we can never thank you enough for what you've done." Ms. Eleanor took the woman's hand, squeezing it gently. "There's no need for thanks," she said softly. "I'm just grateful I was here to help." Lily's father, still holding his daughter close, looked at Ms. Eleanor with tear-filled eyes. We should have listened," he said, his voice heavy with regret. "Lily tried to tell us something was wrong, but we were so caught up in our own lives. We brushed her off, told her she was being silly." His voice broke on the last word, and he hugged Lily tighter. "We almost lost our baby girl because we didn't listen." Ms. Eleanor's heart ached for the family. The pain and regret in the father's voice were palpable. She reached out, laying a comforting hand on his arm. "What matters now is that Lily is safe," she said gently, "and that you've learned the importance of truly listening to your child." Lily's mother nodded fervently. "We promise, sweetheart," she said, looking down at Lily. "From now on, we'll always listen to you. No matter what, no matter when. Your feelings and your safety are the most important things in the world to us." As the family embraced again, Miss Eleanor felt a presence at her side. She turned to see a distinguished-looking man in a police uniform approaching. "Miss Eleanor," he said, extending his hand. "I'm Police Chief Robert Garcia. I wanted to personally thank you for your actions today. Your bravery and quick thinking not only saved young Lily, but have helped us apprehend a dangerous criminal we've been after for months." Ms. Eleanor shook his hand. "I just did what needed to be done, Chief Garcia." The chief smiled warmly. "And that's exactly what makes you a hero, ma'am. Not all heroes wear capes. Some of them sit on park benches and feed pigeons." He reached into his pocket and pulled out a small box. "The mayor asked me to present you with this token of our city's appreciation," he said, opening the box to reveal a small, golden pin in the shape of a shield. "It's not much, but we hope it will serve as a reminder of the lives you've touched today." Ms. Eleanor stared at the pin, feeling overwhelmed. I don't know what to say," she stammered. Chief Garcia pinned the shield to her cardigan with a smile. "You don't need to say anything, Ms. Eleanor. Your actions have spoken louder than any words could." As the chief moved away to speak with his officers, Ms. Eleanor found herself surrounded once again by Lily and her parents. "Ms. Eleanor," Lily's father began, his voice tentative, "we know it's late, and you've been through so much today. But we'd be honored if you'd join us for dinner. We'd love to get to know the woman who saved our daughter's life." Ms. Eleanor blinked in surprise, her hand unconsciously moving to touch the golden pin on her cardigan. "Oh, I wouldn't want to impose," she began, but Lily cut her off. "Please, Ms. Eleanor," the girl pleaded, her eyes shining. "I want you to come. You're my hero." Looking into Lily's hopeful face, Ms. Eleanor felt something shift inside her. The loneliness that had been her constant companion for so long seemed to recede, replaced by a warm glow of connection. She thought of her empty apartment, of the quiet evenings spent with only her memories for company, and made her decision. "I'd be delighted," she said, her voice warm with genuine pleasure. As they walked away from the park together, Lily's small hand tucked securely in hers, Miss Eleanor felt as though she were stepping into a new chapter of her life. The park that had been her refuge, her quiet escape from the world, had become the stage for an extraordinary adventure. And now, as they left its familiar confines, she was embarking on a new journey, one of connection, of purpose, of family. The streets were quiet as they made their way to Lily's home, the evening air cool and refreshing after the tension of the day. Lily chattered happily, her natural resilience shining through as she pointed out her favorite shops and told Ms. Eleanor about her school. Ms. Eleanor listened with rapt attention, marveling at the child's ability to bounce back from such a traumatic experience. She caught Lily's parents watching their daughter with a mixture of love, relief, and lingering guilt, and she knew that this day would leave its mark on all of them. As they approached a charming two-story house with a well-tended garden, Lily tugged on Ms. Eleanor's hand. "This is it," she announced proudly. "This is my home." Ms. Eleanor smiled, taking in the warm glow of lights from the windows, the colorful flowers lining the path. It was a home filled with life and love, everything her own apartment had been lacking. Lily's mother hurried ahead to open the door, ushering them inside. "Please make yourself comfortable," she said, gesturing towards the cozy living room. "I'll just go and put something together for dinner." Ms. Eleanor could hear the tremor in the woman's voice, could see the way her hands shook slightly as she hung up her coat. The events of the day were catching up to all of them, the what-ifs and almost words casting long shadows over their relief. "Why don't I help you in the kitchen?" Ms. Eleanor offered gently. "I may be retired, but I still know my way around a stove." Gratitude shone in Lily's mother's eyes. "That would be wonderful. Thank you." As they moved into the kitchen, leaving Lily and her father in the living room, Ms. Eleanor could hear the low murmur of their voices. She caught fragments of apologies, of promises to do better, of love reaffirmed in the face of near tragedy. In the kitchen, Ms. Eleanor and Lily's mother worked side by side, the familiar rhythms of cooking providing a soothing counterpoint to the emotional turmoil of the day. As they chopped vegetables and stirred pots, the younger woman began to open up. "I can't stop thinking about how close we came to losing her," she confessed, her voice barely above a whisper. "If you hadn't been there..." Ms. Eleanor laid a comforting hand on her arm. "But I was there," she said firmly. "And Lily is safe. What matters now is moving forward, learning from this experience." Lily's mother nodded, wiping away a stray tear. "You're right, of course. It's just, I keep replaying every moment in my head, every time I brushed off her concerns or told her not to bother me. How could I have been so blind?" Ms. Eleanor considered her words carefully before speaking. "Parenting is the hardest job in the world," she said softly. "And in today's world, with all its distractions and pressures, it's all too easy to lose sight of what's truly important. But you love Lily. That much is clear. And you're willing to learn and grow from this experience. That's what matters." As they continued to prepare the meal, Ms. Eleanor shared stories from her own life, of her children, now grown and living far away, of the joys and challenges of motherhood. She spoke of the importance of truly listening, of creating space for open communication even when life gets hectic. By the time they called Lily and her father to the table, a warm atmosphere of understanding had developed between the two women. The meal itself was a simple affair, a hearty vegetable soup, crusty bread, and a hastily assembled salad, but it was infused with a sense of gratitude that made it feel like a feast. As they ate, the conversation flowed easily. Lily regaled them with stories from school, her natural exuberance returning in the safety of her home. Her parents listened with renewed attention, their eyes never straying far from their daughter's animated face. Ms. Eleanor found herself drawn into the family's warmth, sharing her own stories and listening with genuine interest to theirs. As the evening wore on, She felt the last vestiges of her loneliness melting away, replaced by a sense of belonging she hadn't experienced in years. As Lily's father cleared the dishes, Lily turned to Ms. Eleanor with shining eyes. "Will you come visit us again?" she asked eagerly. "Maybe you could come to my school play next month? I'm going to be a tree." Ms. Eleanor glanced at Lily's parents, not wanting to overstep, but they were nodding encouragingly. "We'd love to have you," Lily's mother said warmly. "You're a part of our family now, Ms. Eleanor. If you'd like to be, that is." Ms. Eleanor felt tears pricking at her eyes, a lump forming in her throat. I would be honored," she managed to say. As the evening drew to a close, Ms. Eleanor prepared to take her leave. Lily threw her arms around her in a fierce hug. "Thank you for saving me," she whispered. "You're my hero." Ms. Eleanor hugged her back just as tightly. "And you, my dear," she said softly, "are the bravest girl I know." Lily's parents walked her to the door, expressing their gratitude once again and extracting a promise that she would join them for Sunday dinner the following week. As Ms. Eleanor made her way home through the quiet streets, she felt as though she were walking on air. The golden pin on her cardigan caught the light of the street lamps, a tangible reminder of the extraordinary day. Over the following weeks, Ms. Eleanor's life transformed. Her daily visits to the park took on new meaning as she kept a watchful eye on the children playing, ready to step in if needed. She became a familiar face to many parents who valued her gentle wisdom and kind presence. Sunday dinners with Lily's family became a cherished tradition. Ms. Eleanor found herself baking cookies for Lily's class, helping with homework, and even chaperoning a school field trip. The love and connection she had been missing for so long filled her days with joy and purpose. As promised, Ms. Eleanor attended Lily's school play, sitting in the audience, watching Lily sway proudly as the most enthusiastic tree in the forest. She felt her heart swell with grandmotherly pride. After the performance, Lily ran to her, beaming. "Did you see me, Ms. Eleanor?" "Did you see?" "I did, my brave girl," Ms. Eleanor replied, hugging her tightly. "You were the finest tree in all the land." On a warm spring day, almost a year after the incident in the park, Ms. Eleanor sat on her favorite bench, Lily beside her. They were tossing breadcrumbs to the pigeons, just as Ms. Eleanor had done alone so many times before. "Ms. Eleanor," Lily said thoughtfully, "do you ever think about that day? The day you saved me?" Ms. Eleanor paused, considering her words carefully. "I do, Lily. But do you know what I think about most?" Lily shook her head, curious. "I think about how that day didn't just save you. It saved me too." Ms. Eleanor smiled, her eyes misty. "You see, I was very lonely before I met you. But you and your family brought light back into my life. You gave me a purpose again." Lily leaned against Ms. Eleanor's side, a gesture that had become comfortingly familiar. "I'm glad we saved each other," she said simply. As they sat together, watching the pigeons and enjoying the spring sunshine, Ms. Eleanor marveled at how life could change in an instant. What had started as an ordinary day in the park had set in motion a series of events that had given her a second chance at family, at purpose, at joy. The park around them bustled with life. Children laughing, parents chatting, dogs barking. And in the midst of it all, on a weathered wooden bench, sat an unlikely pair, a young girl and an elderly woman, bound together by an extraordinary twist of fate and the enduring power of compassion. Ms. Eleanor's decision to protect Lily not only saved her from a dangerous situation, but also brought a sense of hope and purpose back into her own life. It's a powerful reminder that small acts of courage can create a ripple effect that touches many lives. What would you have done if you were in Ms. Eleanor's place? Let us know in the comments below. And if this story touched your heart, don't forget to hit that subscribe button so you never miss out on more inspiring tales like this one.